Welcome to the Promis Recovery Centre. I'm Robert Lefever. We treat any form of addiction, but in particular the big three: alcoholism, drug addiction, eating disorders. And what we hope is that you will learn something about what can really be done about those things. What if the program fails? Well, it does. In Promis, we reckon to have about 65% of people get into long-term recovery, which means that 35% don't. Now, my job as the director of Promis is to focus on that 35% and to see what I can do to reduce that number of failures, to see if we can try, some new therapeutic approaches. Should we use medicines? Should we use, through our research department, trying out different methods of psychological approach? Should we get some different staff? Should we, try, this, that and the other? That's my job to look at that. And the end result is that over the years we have changed a lot of the things that we've done here. And that's very healthy. What it means is some of the things we were doing initially were not right. They weren't necessarily actively wrong, but they weren't the best, and so we tried to change them. Promis was the first place in the UK to look at nicotine addiction, the first place to look at gambling addiction, the first place to treat eating disorders on a 12-step basis in the UK, on an inpatient basis, the first place to look at sex and love addiction, the first place to look at compulsive helping. All of these things we discovered were leading to relapse. They caused people to come back. Initially, when I first started, we had just alcohol and drugs. That's all anybody looked at. Well, Promis has very significantly changed the picture of treatment in the UK as a result of looking at a broader range of addictive substances and behaviours. So that's one thing that we've looked at in particular. The second thing is to work very much with the families. That it's very difficult if you get yourself well and you go back to a crazy family. So, and by crazy, I use a word like crazy affectionately rather than, pejoratively. Because if you've got a compulsive helper who's going to take care of everything you do, every mistake you make, that is not a friend, it's a menace. If my wife went on paying for all my gambling debts by taking on extra work, that isn't helping me. If I go on paying for my son's debts that he gets from his cocaine, the end result was I paid for my son's cocaine. That is not good parenting. It was appalling parenting, but I didn't know I was doing it. All I was doing was paying off his overdraft. Thinking, oh, I must be a very bad father, and I'm not really spending enough time with him. I found the excuses to enable him to continue using drugs. So that's not clever of me. So a compulsive helper like me, I'm both an addict and a compulsive helper, is not a healthy thing to have around. So very much we try to work with the families in that way to try to get a healthier environment. The third thing we do is to have the extended care facility, the halfway house. We found that the initial number of people who relapsed was about 1/3. Now, if you put these people into a halfway house, you can reduce that right down. You can help that number of people. And in Kendrick Mews, we've got another 24 beds up there to help people at a much less expensive way, because we have no kitchen staff, no nurses, no house staff. They have to look after themselves. So when patients are first in here, they wouldn't be able to look after themselves. So we do need to provide the nurses, the chefs, the house staff, and so on. But this lot, if we didn't have that extended care facility, we'd lose a third. Whereas now, with that, at 1/3 of the price, we're able to help a much larger number of people. In the halfway house that we had in North Kensington, in my wife's and my own home, when the children had grown up, we moved down to the basement and we had 12 addicts above us. And we kept them there for up to a year. We lost £250,000 on that. But the relapse rate was 5%. It was quite incredible. So the thing that was told to me by Geraldine O'Delaney, who ran a treatment centre in New Jersey, was the thing that's most helpful is tincture of time. The longer you can keep people off the source in a protective environment, the more their heads clear, the more they see things in a better way, the better chance they've got of getting better. So tincture of time. But you've got to find a way of making it less expensive. And so that's what we try to do with Halfway House. So those are the things that we try to do to protect against failure. But what do you do if even after you've done all that, they still fail? Well, the answer to that question is, the behaviour is what he or she wants to do. You're seeing complete madness. Now, you're not going to be able to stop that with love, education, or punishment. The three things that everybody tries don't work. You can love the family to bits, and they'll still go on doing the addictive things. You can educate them, you can say, can't you see what you're doing, can't you see what you're doing, can't you see what you're doing? And they'll say, yes, I can, but that's what I'm going to go on doing. You can punish them. 80% of the prison population have addiction problems. They're being punished for being ill. 60% of them will relapse. They come out of prison and they're chronic recidivists. They'll go back into prison. Punishment doesn't work for addicts. So what does work? Love, education and punishment. But it's a different form of love, education and punishment. It's this form of love when you take your mind off yourself and put it onto somebody else. So it's not my love for my son, it's my son's love for someone else, another addict. I can't do his loving for him. May can't do my loving for me. It's the love within the anonymous fellowships, taking our minds off ourselves and putting it onto somebody else. The education is what we're doing now, talking about addictive disease. I go to schools quite commonly to talk about addiction. I've just been invited to go again to Harrow School to talk then. And I always start the same way. I say, look, I'm not going to talk to you about drugs, because you know more about drugs than I do. I'm going to talk about addiction because I know more about addiction than you do. And that way, I've got the pupils on my side, and they listen. And so it's the talking about addiction and recovery, rather than just about drugs. And yet, the government still goes on. You get Plod comes along and says, this is Moroccan black. Well, you think the boys don't know that? They've been selling it. You don't need education on that. You need education on how you're going to get better. How are you going to stop the addiction? That's what they don't know. So a lot of the sort of public education is misapplied. It won't work that way. And the punishment that works is the punishment that we give ourselves. I did not want to go on as I was. I did not like it when my wife was sitting in front of a divorce lawyer. I was in pain. And the thing that most helps people, would you believe, is pain. That's why we change our behaviour. Now, I'm not saying that we should cause pain. I'm a doctor, by and large, I don't cause pain. But I have had to learn to leave people in the pain that they cause. I do not nowadays pay off other people's debts. I do not nowadays soothe down landladies. I do not tell lies to employers. I do not enable people to continue their addiction. I give them the consequences of their behaviour. Now that is not easy. That is not easy for me to do. When you hear the phrase tough love, it's tough on the person who does it. It's not, my being tough on somebody else. It's very difficult to say to your son, I am not paying off your debt. It's very difficult to say, you can't live here if you're going to go on using drugs. It's very difficult to say, I love you, but not your behaviour. All these things are very difficult. And it's tough on the families and loved ones to be able to say that. So what happens if it fails? You simply have to give them the consequence of their behaviour.